Buenos días. No sé si definir si están más animados o más apagados que ayer. Buenos días. Segundo día, ¿preparados para lo que se viene el día de hoy? Sí, yo sé. Así que queremos extender esta cálida bienvenida a todos los participantes de esta 10ª edición de Innovation Land Summit 2024. El evento que sin lugar a dudas reúne a los líderes más destacados en innovación y emprendimiento de nuestro país. Para que le demos entonces agilidad a la agenda que hoy tenemos, que está igual de nutrida que la que tuvimos el día de ayer, vamos a iniciar este segundo día dándole la bienvenida a Julian Bleecker, founder of the Near Future Laboratory, con una conferencia It's Time to Imagine Harder, Bringing Imagination and Innovation Back Together Again. Julian, bienvenido, esta audiencia es tuya.
Good morning, everyone. Very excited to be here. Very excited to talk about the relationship between imagination and innovation. And I also want to share with you some of the processes by which I've developed over many years to connect these two critical elements to the ways in which we think about the world and the ways in which we move the world forward. I'll give you a brief introduction to myself. So I've got a very eclectic background. So I'm an engineer by training, and I'll tell you a story shortly about how I came to that. And after going through 2 engineering degrees, I really wanted to understand much more richly the relationship between humans and our desires and our dreams and our aspirations for creating a better world and the ways in which technology can do that. And that's the core element of what I think about when I think about innovation. So I got this strange last degree in history of consciousness. Essentially, it's a history of ideas, the ways in which ideas in the world come into being. Worked with a lot of clients over the last 25 or 30 years, and a lot of them have these kinds of questions that I think are on our minds today. How do we create more habitable near future worlds? And it could be something very focused around something that, say, Amazon is doing, or trying to find ways in which they can encourage imagination and creativity within their organizations. We know as organizations get large, they begin to create structures around them that make creativity hard to express. They create formal systems and processes where imagination isn't quite able to do the things that it's able to do and that we want it to be able to do. I also have this organization, Near Future Laboratory, and through that we have all these different ways in which we communicate the ideas and the conversations and the projects and the people that we associate with. One is one of my favorite things to do. It's our podcast, and this is an opportunity where I get to talk to people who I really want to talk to. Oftentimes it's just 2 people, maybe 3 people, as if we were sitting around having a coffee, and I think we'll do something like that later. I think Joe Black and I were talking about just doing an impromptu podcast after our talk later this afternoon, and that's very much the spirit. We want to create associations amongst the people who are thinking about new ways of invigorating creativity, bringing creativity back into the conversation, bringing imagination into organizations as a core competency, not just something that's done by little children, not something that we sort of look at as not our main focus, but literally imagination as a core element of a role. I can imagine a world in which imagination is listed as a requirement for a job, and it's taken very seriously. This is the kind of world that I'm trying to build and what I want to encourage us to think about. Sometimes I get asked to do things like this, like talk about the future. This is another way in which we share our ideas about what we're thinking about and the ways in which we work. I love doing these kinds of things because they give me an opportunity to essentially spread the word about the importance of imagination and the role that imagination can play in thinking about the future. And then we do things like this, so summits and retreats, ways in which we can gather people together, and again, this core element of collaboration, of association, of celebrating each other's work and sharing it and finding ways that we can work together is really important. So doing events where we can get together with people and help them think about and get outside of the box of their usual kind of corporate world is absolutely crucial to this project that we're working on. So let's start here. So we talk about innovation. Of course, it's one of the key words of this event. I would start to think even before that and remind ourselves that imagination is the thing that comes before innovation. We have to imagine into the worlds that we want to inhabit. We have to use this incredible capability that we all have in this very funny piece of meat in our heads, which is a way in which we can sort of sense into and dream into worlds as a start. And I want to talk a little bit about how this works and the ways in which I've seen it. So if you're of a certain age, you'll remember luggage used to look like this. It used to be the thing that you kind of carried along. And of course, it had to be represented as having this kind of carefree spirit. And it's fun to carry luggage around. And wouldn't we all want to be able to just kind of dance along like this with our luggage? Of course, that was never actually the case. We looked at this thing as something that provided opportunities for us to move around the world and travel around the world. But for some reason, for hundreds of years, maybe longer, no one really thought about what it would be like to put wheels on luggage. And this is a big question that I have, and I think it frames a lot of the questions around innovation. What took so long for them to put wheels on luggage? The wheel was invented like 6,000 years ago. But still, and look, you can even see in this ad, they've got the luggage in the car, which has the wheels, but still they're not putting the wheels on the luggage. And I find these kinds of challenges, the ways in which the lack of imagination sort of hampers the kind of innovation that now we take for granted. And it wasn't until 1991 that a patent was actually filed that showed wheels on luggage. And if you even look in some of the literature, when they first did it, the wheels are going the wrong way. The wheels are going so that the luggage is going to tip over one way or the other. So even the fact that they could see it and they could play with it and they could prototype it, it still was a little bit broken. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the thing that stops us from sensing into what ultimately becomes just normal, ordinary, you don't even think twice about it? And then once they put the wheels on the luggage, everyone goes crazy. They find all kinds of different ways to change luggage into, I don't know what it is, sort of a chair with the luggage, and then it's got wheels, and you kind of zip around. And this is the moment when the innovation opens up all these kind of crazy opportunities. Whether or not you would do something like this, I mean, it looks kind of fun, but all of a sudden organizations and companies and startups are doing all kinds of crazy things with it. Now it's a scooter. But the wheel on the luggage was the thing that really opened up the opportunities for all kinds of interesting, creative things. And then, of course, you get this. Like there's going to be the retro, where people look at the thing, now it's got wheels on it, now I don't want wheels on it, now I just want to carry it around like old-fashioned times. And those are also these beautiful opportunities. We think about cameras, digital photography is something that everyone sort of takes for granted. But then, of course, you have a generation that looks to innovate even further, and they say, like, there used to be this thing called film. Of course, being a photographer is like, yeah, I remember that. But they want to sense into it, they want to feel into it, they want to make it into their own. And these are also those other beautiful evolutions in which ideas sort of spread. We want, as humans, to think about new ways in which we might evolve, in which we might make the world into something that we believe in. Vision is required for innovation, an ability to see into a world that other people don't quite see. It's very much a kind of explorer's mode, looking at and sensing what could be possible. Jogging used to not be a thing, just like there weren't wheels on luggage. Jogging wasn't something that you really talked about. And it took this guy, Bill Bowerman, who was one of the founders of Nike. He had to actually write a book called Jogging. And I like to imagine this world where he introduces this book called Jogging, and people are like, hey, excuse me, what's that? I've never heard that word before. How does it work? And I can almost see him in a world in which he's like, no one's really getting what I'm talking about. I know what I'll do. I'll write a book about it. I'll write a book with such vision and such passion and such a sense of purpose that they'll really see the world that I'm dreaming. And look at the ways in which he has to describe it in the book. Jogging, it's free. It's easy. Relaxing, it can be done alone or in groups. It's fun. It's good for the heart and lungs. All the things that people didn't understand. He just sort of spells it out to them. He paints the world. He does it in a way in which he's effectively selling this idea of jogging and describing it in such a way that people can sort of get a sense of what it is. But he has to go further. In the book, he has to show you jogging. He has to visualize it. He has to force you to see the dream that he sees. And as a track coach, amongst a group of people who do jogging routinely, he has to say, okay, it's not this thing. It's not this elite activity. It's something that anyone can do. You even look at the shoes they're using. I mean, I look at the photo and it's like, that hurts just looking at it. But there was this moment of like evolution where he's just trying to show you, what does this world look like? He shows you anyone can do it. He gives you a sense of possibility. He shows you the dream that he has, and he explains it into your way in a very pragmatic way. You can see on the page, he's saying, here's the routine. He's spelling it out very didactically, very specifically. Monday, do this. Tuesday, do this. Wednesday, do this. It's essentially instructions for how to live in a world in which something called jogging is as normal, ordinary, and everyday as we see it now today. Everyone can do it. And I love these kinds of ways of looking at things that used to exist in the world as something that was fantastical, something that people didn't even understand. There wasn't language for it. There wasn't a routine for it. There weren't devices and products and services for it that made it more possible and gave you a sense of, how do I enter into this? And that's what the vision needs to do. It needs to show you the world. And it's, in some sense, our responsibility and our role as entrepreneurs, as innovators, as creatives, as leaders, to do this project, to show people the world that we're imagining, and doing it in a way that provides this beautiful point of entry for them, so that they can really feel into the world. They feel a sense of enthusiasm for it and excitement for it. Audacity is required for innovation. You have to have a sense of intrepidness, of purpose, of I'm going to do this no matter what people say, no matter what people say, no, we don't put wheels on luggage. We don't do that around here. Or no, jogging, it looks like you just might sweat a whole bunch and that feels uncomfortable. You have to keep pushing through that. And I'm reminded of the Olympian Dick Fosbury, who died 2 years ago. Dick Fosbury was the one in the Mexico City Olympics in 1968 who decided to jump over the high jump going backwards. And it's hard for us to even visualize that previously people had jumped over forwards. And Dick Fosbury was just one of those kind of characters who just saw into a world, a little bit of a strange character. He wore 2 different colored shoes, and I don't know if that was superstition or he just found these right shoes from the lot of shoes that fit him right. He was someone who was very inward focused. You can see in some of the videos you can find on YouTube of him preparing, where he's just focused on himself. He's just looking down, he's clenching his fists. It's almost as if he's imagining, he's rehearsing in his head what he's going to do and how he's going to perform. And whereas the other competitors during the event were jumping over forwards, which is very strange to see, he decided to go over backwards. And I'd like to imagine people telling him, it's like, no, Dick, don't do that. That's not how we do things here. We go over forwards. That's just the way the game is played. And there are all these other conditions around it that made this even more possible, aside from him looking at the way in which the body moved and really studying it and not listening to the experts. The ways in which you fall were changed. You used to fall into sand, and then it was sawdust, and then finally they put down mats. All these conditions made it possible for him to go over backwards and not hurt himself. And he won the gold medal by a fair stretch. Innovation is also inspired by imagination. Imagination is that thing, that capability that we all have. It's almost like this existentially vital capability that we have to imagine the world, see the world, dream the world in unexpected, beautiful ways. And I don't know what goes on in the brain, but there's something beautiful about its ability to sense into the world and imagine the world otherwise. And I think something happens to us at some point in our lives where we're either encouraged to continue to imagine or we're told, no, stop doing that silly stuff. That's not how you get ahead in the world. And I think we need to remind ourselves that we have this existentially vital capability, this thing that has allowed us to do everything from put wheels on luggage, to imagine into a world in which there's jogging, to all the great technological innovations that we see coming from all sites of innovation and design. These are the things that we need to learn how to tap into. Now I want to talk to you about a process that I've found works really well in this context to unlock imagination. I call it design fiction. And I'm deliberately calling it that because I want to bring 2 things together. I want to bring design, which I look at as a material making practice. It's the thing that translates the visions that we have in our head, the things that we sort of see in our mind, into something that's in the world that we can point to, that we can hold, and fiction. Now, when I say fiction, I'm not specifically talking about written fiction. I'm talking about things that are not true yet, things that are still in this state of wonder, still in this state of almost there, or an idea that I have that isn't quite in the world, something that is just maybe a sketch of something. And I want to bring these two things together to imagine into a world in which ideas in our head can be made tangible, that we can point to and that are real, and they're maybe still not quite true. They're still in that mode of a prototype, something that doesn't quite work, but it is an idea. So design fiction is the creation of artifacts from possible near futures. It's the creation of objects that are almost here, things that feel like they've come from a possible future world, things that are just at the edge of possibility, or maybe even feel a little bit science fiction. Or maybe they've come from a world that's slightly to the side of ours, this idea of multiple timelines. Maybe it's something that just exists just over here, that could have been, but hasn't happened. Or that could have been, had conditions been a little bit different in the world. That could have been if someone made a different decision. And allowing ourselves to recognize that there are multiple ways in which things come into being in the world, and they require all kinds of conditions and all kinds of circumstances for them to be realized. So my whole idea of this starts with these guys. Star Trek was a show that when I was a young kid, I enjoyed thoroughly. And when you're at that young age where you don't quite have the language to describe what you're interested in, you don't have a way of describing your fascination with things, your language goes as far as like, whoa, this is cool. And not much more than that. And that's a feeling. That's an expression of a feeling of sense of possibility, a sense of ambition, a sense of, I want to be a part of this. What is this? I want to know more about it. I want to feel into this world. I want to have these guys over for a barbecue. You know, just all those beautiful feelings that we have when we're young are things, the imagination really expressing itself. It's like the imagination finding its way to play in the world. And I had that very vividly when I enjoyed the show when I was a kid. And there was especially this thing. I don't know what it was about the Star Trek communicator that I just loved. Now, this is before cell phones. This idea of being able to talk to people when they're not there was absolutely fascinating. I was absolutely fascinated with radio, fascinated with electronics. I played a lot with amateur radio. I would play a lot with the radio that we had in our home. I had a shortwave radio where I could tune into different places around the world. And there was something about that. It was just all these different ways in which my imagination was trying to understand what this thing represented. And at some point, in one of our local bookshops, I came across this book. This was a book, it was called the Star Trek Starfleet Technical Manual. And when I saw this, it's like my imagination short-circuited. I was like, wait a minute. How could there be a technical manual for a show that's on television? I knew it was a show. I didn't think the guys in the little box were real. I knew they were actors, and I knew that there was a drama, and there was a script, and there was probably cameras, all this kind of stuff. But the fact that now it's like as if this world had popped out into my world, like that moment when all of a sudden you're not sure what's real and what isn't. And that felt really exciting to me. It felt like there was this sense of possibility that I hadn't explored. And in this technical manual, they had things like this. So as a young kid, 8, 9 years old, when I'm starting to learn electronics, this all of a sudden becomes a kind of, it's legible to me. I can start to read into it. I can sense what this means. This looks like an engineering diagram. Well, wait a minute. If it's a television show, why do they need engineering diagrams for a prop? What is going on here? Where does this come from? How is this expressing other aspects of the world that don't exist in a television set? They would have things like this, like the ear receiver. This just seems so cool. To be able to have something that you could plug into your ear so you could have this private listening experience. And I remember Lieutenant Uhura, who's the communications chief on the show, she would use it as a way to establish communications with other ships. And just all aspects of that seemed incredibly cool. It's like, I want to be there. I want to be able to experience this. but still it's just a show on television. So now I'm confused, like what is going on? How am I feeling into this world? What's going on with my imagination? Why am I seeing these things and starting to make decisions about what I want to do when I grow up? Do I want to be an astronaut, or do I want to be an engineer? Do I want to be a pilot? All these things are activating me and making me think about possibility in a way that the show by itself didn't, and a way in which those technical diagrams by themselves didn't. It was this bringing together of these different elements. And I even think about that ear receiver. In what way did it anticipate the AirPod? What's the relationship between something that was drawn in a diagram from a show 50 years ago and something that comes into the world at another time? How does imagination connect with the innovation that might go on in an organization like Apple? Now, I'm not saying that the Star Trek ear receiver was the reason that the AirPod came into being. But what I would say is that the imagination and the expansive ability to imagine that a science fiction show allows gets into our consciousness. It gets into the way in which we sense into the world, and it changes the way we think about this. And it changes the way we think about possibility. So then I start wondering, how can you bring all those beautiful imaginative elements of something like science fiction and connect it to innovation? Is there a way to operationalize, to create a system, a process by which whatever goes on in the imagination when you're doing something like a science fiction show can be applied to the kind of innovation that we do in organizations where we're looking to deliver a product, or we're looking to develop new products, or we're looking to create entirely new product categories? Can we bring all these things together in a way that helps us imagine into the world and helps us to think about how we might innovate? So it turns out that Star Trek Starfleet Technical Manual was made by a guy. This is the guy. His name is Franz Joseph. Franz Joseph, in the 1960s and 70s, he was a mechanical draftsman. He drew diagrams, likely for the aerospace industry. He was based in Southern California, just around San Diego. And this is what he did day in and day out. And the story goes that he heard that there were some students at the local university who were really into Star Trek and were doing drawings and sketches and just doing kind of beautiful things that fans will do around a show to help them imagine into the world in a more expansive way. And he sort of looked at what they were doing, and with his skill set as a technician, as someone who's able to draw these diagrams, he thought, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what the show would look like and what these ideas would look like if me, as a mechanical engineer, as a draftsman, actually tried to represent these things. And so that's what he did. He essentially spent his free time, which to me is just a testament to the ability to latch onto something and really want to create and expansively imagine the world and translate it, not through a script. He didn't write a script, or he didn't go to try to work in the art department to make props. He's like, I see the world in this very particular way, because day in and day out, I draw these diagrams, or wings for airplanes, or for jet engines, whatever it might be. I want to bring my way of describing and representing and drawing the world into this world and translate the fictional universe into this other universe. And so this is the kind of place that he usually worked in. And this is the kind of sensibility that he brought to drawing these diagrams. And the way I look at him is that he was almost like an archaeologist, but of the future. Now, if we think about what archaeologists do, they dig through the past, trying to find artifacts that represent the cultures of worlds that are now gone. They find these little elements. It might be a piece of pottery, it might be a piece of metal or a piece of stone. They might find a settlement. And with these, because there's no one left to have a conversation with, they try to tell stories about these worlds. And because they're experts in their world, they can make it legible to us. They can make us understand what used to be here. What maybe was their form of politics? What kind of power structures did they have? What was their religion? What were their beliefs? What were their gods? What did they eat? What were their family structures? And I look at Franz Joseph as doing the same kind of thing, but rather than digging into the past, digging through the dirt, he was actually digging into the future. Metaphorically speaking, he was trying to sense into the world and translate the world and do it just through artifacts. So he wasn't trying to tell you an entire story about the world from the top down. He was literally going from the bottom up. He was looking through the cupboards and cabinets of this fictional Star Trek universe, looking at the equipment that they had, the kinds of structures that they had, the ships that they flew in, the kinds of roles that they had, even down to the uniforms that they wore. And he's like, I'm going to tell a story about this world, but I'm not going to do it just with language. It's not going to be a once upon a time kind of story. It's going to be a story told purely through objects, through material cultural artifacts from that world. He's going to do a little bit of engineering and design in order to represent and provide another point of entry for us to make sense of what this world is and how it operates. And by that, he's really going to activate our imagination, as he did for me when I was 8 years old, looking through this book over and over and over again, and just trying to make sense of what was going on, and really allow myself to have the luxury of creatively and imaginatively making sense of this world and really feeling it. But this is what the archaeologist does, right? They sort of dig through the earth. They're looking for an artifact. When they get the artifact, they ponder it. They make this gesture, the kind of squinting gesture, looking in it, trying to get it to tell a story to them about the world, trying to find a way to express what the world meant. They find the past artifact, and they hold it up as almost this representation of what was. It's not a person, it's not a book, it's not a story, it's an object that represents that world. It implies all aspects of the world. And this is what Franz Joseph's doing. He's finding the object that represents the world. It says, this is a place that talks to each other. They have these different devices that allow them to do that. And it provides this other way in which we can make sense of what the Star Trek universe is. And it's worth noting that that Star Trek Starfleet technical manual became a bestseller in the New York Times. And all the other, we know Star Trek is this fantastic, many decades old franchise, very popular. Every single Star Trek series has its own technical manual. So the thing that Franz Joseph created, independent of Star Trek, he wasn't asked to do it. He did it on his own, out of his own passion for wanting to make sense of the world and wanting to express it, and his enthusiasm for the show then became a real thing, and was that kind of visionary moment that carried this sort of mode of trying to tell a story about the world into the future. And then, of course, we know from the anecdotal stories that that directly influenced the development of that early, beautiful Motorola StarTAC phone. And there are interviews with the lead designer of that who said, like, oh, yeah, I love that. That really influenced what I thought about it. And it could carry into the experience of people who had that phone. So it's almost like, yeah, it's like the communicator from Star Trek. It adds this other layer of meaning to that early phone, all nicely well connected. None of this is on purpose. These things happen, and they happen because of the beauty and the power of the human imagination to think expansively, to think creatively. And I love these kinds of moments. Something to think about and consider when we look at ways in which we want to tell stories about the innovations that we're working on within our own organizations. And of course, many of you probably heard about the Humane Pen spectacular failure, but that notwithstanding, a lot of the conversations are about, if you remember Star Trek The Next Generation, they had their communicator was a badge that you pressed. And you talk to some of the designers and it's like, yeah, that would be really cool. Love that. That was a great idea. And you can find the way in which it sort of attaches itself to all these very real world innovations. Another beautiful example, despite the challenge that they're having. Early days, people are still figuring things out. So this is the question, how do we unlock imagination? How do we tap into this? We've seen this example through Star Trek, but what is there and how do we do it? Is there some kind of process? And this is where we get to design fiction. And I sort of break it down this way. I try not to be overly prescriptive about how it works, but I think that there is a certain framework, an approach, a set of steps that can lead the way in which we do it. And oftentimes, when I'll work with clients, we'll allow these to kind of evolve and develop and shift. We don't want to constrain the imagination and make it fit into a very specific set of procedures so that you begin to constrain yourself to the point where you're not allowing yourself to say the things that might be bubbling in your head, to express your dreams or the visions that you have in your head. We want it to be very expansive. But if we were to have a set of steps, this is how it goes. So assess, synthesize, imagine, and then create. So let's start with assess. Oftentimes when you're thinking about a new idea, you'll have a bunch of sort of thoughts and considerations. You maybe have some trend reports. You're noticing things in the world. You're capturing newspaper articles. You're hearing people talk about things in blogs or in podcasts. There seems to be something going on in the world. And you're just gathering this material in whatever way you might gather it. Maybe you have a Notion doc, a Google doc, whatever it might be, it doesn't matter, but you're sort of gathering all this material. You're doing an assessment of the state of the art. Who's doing what and how are they doing it? And then you start to synthesize it. So you're starting to gather things into certain categories. And these categories might go into different directions. Some might be product focused, some might be service focused, some might be indicators that are in certain sectors, like it might be a social trend, it might be a political trend or an economic trend, perhaps has something to do with the environment and climate change that is relevant, and you're just sort of organizing these things in different ways to help begin that process of making sense of things. And then you start imagining. You start asking yourself a simple question. I wonder what would happen if. I wonder what a product might look like if. And let's just take a simple example, something that we can all relate to. Let's say we're wondering about the future of breakfast. What's the future of breakfast, given all these trends that I'm looking at? How would I express these trends and represent them in the context of breakfast? And your first inclination might be to have like a big statement about where breakfast is going. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to ground things in a very relatable way. We're trying to create that relationship between the future of breakfast and the experience that our audience might have, that they can say, oh, yeah, I go through that experience all the time. We want to create that connection, maybe similar to the connection I had and I felt when I saw Star Trek, and then because I was into electronics and design and communications, all of a sudden I saw a diagram of a communicator that made it feel like, oh my gosh, is this real? Is this something that I can build? We want to create that kind of connection so that we're actually providing a point of entry for our audience, for our stakeholders, for our design teams, for ourselves to imagine into that world. So if we imagine a future of breakfast, we might want to ask ourselves, what's the future of breakfast like if we were to represent it as a box of cereal? To really trace all those big global trends down to something that is normal, ordinary, and everyday. Something that everyone sort of sees, everyone can relate to. But what we want to do is we want to represent those trends in the context of something like a box of cereal. So for example, if we saw one of the trends that there were evolutions in the kinds of protein that humans consume, maybe due to climate change, maybe due to our changes in tastes, our expectations and habits, and let's just say, for the sake of argument, that insect protein is as now normal, ordinary, and everyday as wheels on luggage, jogging, televisions that we talk to, all these things that at one point we thought were crazy. It's never going to happen. Don't see it. Now it's just part of the world. So we might have a box of cereal called Cricket Crunch, and we might want to show it as an object that has come from this future, and we'll talk about it that way. We'll say, hey, you know what? I traveled into the future. You know what I brought back? I brought back a box of cereal. Cool. Let's take a look. What's on it? What's going on with that box of cereal? And we might start representing all the characteristics of those trends, now translated, because we're using our imagination, into the characteristics of the package design. It's a great exercise to try to fit macro trends into these really microscopic details. What would it be as if you had the brief as a creative, as a designer, as a packaging designer, to show me the future of cereal if insect protein were an ingredient, let's say instead of flour? That might seem crazy, but the exercise of doing that is really a way to sort of activate and stretch your imagination into that. So we might show things about maybe new sites of manufacture. So for some reason, South Korea is manufacturing breakfast cereal. Some of the trends might indicate different characteristics that are unexpected that, again, might feel like, it's just at the edge, I'm not sure, maybe we might not get there. But you play a role, and your responsibility is to show a variety of ways in which these trends would translate into real-world implications. Now, you're not making a prediction. You're not saying this is going to happen. What you're saying is, this is what the world might look like if this particular thing happened. And you're making it tangible, you're making it legible, you're grounding it in the world that makes people feel into it, makes them sense into it. You're helping them make sense of what the world might be like if. There's another example. So a project that we did a number of years ago, which was, I think, the first time we actually tried to bring this process to bear, was to create a catalog of stuff as if the trends of the day became normal, ordinary, and everyday. So all the crazy, wild things that were going on at a particular moment, but represented as a bunch of products. Crazy stuff. Just the kind of thing that probably shows up in your spam inbox all the time, or you get in the mailbox. We want to show that world. So as if all the amazing, beautiful innovations of today were just normal, ordinary, and everyday. We didn't think about twice. Of course, you got the doorknob with the AI. Why wouldn't you get that? That's totally normal. You don't know what it does, but it's there. It's just a part of the world we live in. And so this is how we went about it. We just did an assessment where we looked at all the trends. We sort of organized them and categorized them into different categories and tried to make sense of what they might look like in a way. And that became our way of imagining into the world. So all those kinds of big macro ideas, AI, blockchain, IoT, all these big topics that really are hard to imagine. We know the words, we sense that there's something at the vanguard that we want to explore, but we don't know what they mean in the sense of what is an IoT chair. And so we want to begin to create more refined representations of these, things that make it a little bit clearer what that actually means. And so this is a part of that step. It's like in this context, in this workshop, is beginning to do that. And pondering things, just giving ourselves time and the luxury to have conversations around it, to wonder about it, to allow us to pull references from other aspects of our life, and bringing a whole diverse group of people together. So at this particular event, we had science fiction writers, museum curators, artists, journalists, we had industrial designers, engineers, graduate students who were sort of studying and sort of gave us another generation's perspective on the future, and having these rich conversations in order to imagine into what this world might look like. And the refinement continues. So you start bringing it down, you start drawing things out, you start imagining it in the context of IoT, but now you have to represent it as a product in a catalog. What is the thing? And what are the constraints on representing something in your imagination in the context of a product catalog? And anyone who's worked in this kind of trying to represent a product to a consumer or a service to a consumer, you know it's really, really tight. You got, nowadays, I don't know what it is. You have 3 seconds to get their attention, maybe 5 keywords, maybe 4 images. And so you have that beautiful creative constraint that kind of hurts in a way, but it's also this wonderful opportunity to try to get your idea and show it to someone in a way that has that kind of compelling nature to it. And then it gets a little bit more refined. Now you're starting to feel real. It's starting to look like something that could actually exist. And in this mode, we're being very, very quick. It's like a sprint. So we're just pulling images off the internet just for the purposes of like making our imagination feel and see the world in a much more refined way. This is the creative part. This is the part where we're actually creating these representations of all these crazy things and being expansive. It's not just one thing. It's hundreds of things. Again, now it's starting to feel like a real thing. Now we're actually going to things. Well, what's a catalog? Well, it's got pages. It's not up on a wall. So you're starting to do another level of making it feel tangible and making it feel real. And then finally, you have the final version. So this was called TBD Catalog, and it has all these different products representing the possible future. This is something that it's one of our, we're also a publisher, it's one of our best-selling books because it still continues 10 years later, because people love the way in which it sort of represents and it provides them a platform and a way of thinking about the future and a template that they can bring into their organizations and try on their own. And of course, it's evolved over the years, so as trends have changed, we've sort of looked at all the new popular topics. So AI was a big one in the latest version. Back in 2012, it was like we were sort of like, blockchain, I don't know about this blockchain thing. Maybe, let's put it in there because we don't know what it is. Of course, it became a huge thing. I'm not saying we guessed, we anticipated it, but we gave ourselves the ability to take something that was very fringe and that was only talked about by a few very strange characters and say, I wonder what would happen if. And I would have been just as happy if blockchain never became a thing, but just became something that was in the catalog, as if it was sort of some vintage retro thing. Here's an example, is one of my favorite examples, like what if Kohler, the supply company, actually had a collab with OpenAI? What does that look like? Now, as weird and kind of awkward as that might seem, it also seems like, actually, such a bad idea. I don't know exactly what it would be. I can't describe to it as a complete product. I can't give you the specification. But what I can do is imply that it happened. I can suggest it. I can give you room to imagine into it. I can get you to a point where you might ask me, well, wait a minute, what's going on there? When did this happen? Who's working on that? Is this Joe on the third floor? I heard something about this. No, we made this up. We did this because we want to open the conversation and wonder what this world might be like. Other things came along too, different kinds of devices and services that were representing certain conditions and certain concerns, fears that people had about the future. This is one of my favorites. This is a lawyer, but he comes on a card. So it's almost like the things they're talking about now with AI being just a chat, a little chatbot that you could have. There was the one case of the guy who had the lawyer in his ear, and he got into a little bit of trouble for that. Or if the metaverse takes off, of course, there are going to be real estate brokers who are trying to sell you property in the metaverse. What does that look like? How do you represent the spirit and the kind of comic attitude of some real estate brokers and show that this is what we might be seeing in the world? You could see this on a bus stop or on the side of a building. This guy is great. He'll find you the best property in the metaverse. And we've done similar things for companies like IKEA. As IKEA tries to wander into the world of home life, we help them imagine into it by using design fiction to show what their catalog might actually look like. What are the different kinds of products that might operate in that world? What might work look like? And doing it in the form of an IKEA catalog, which is globally recognized for its design, its look, its tone of voice, everything about it provides that kind of confusing moment to someone. That beautiful moment that I felt when I saw that Star Trek Starfleet manual where I was like, wait, what's going on here? And that's the mode that we want to create. We want to get people to feel excited and kind of curious and have a little bit of a smile on their face. Someone at an event the other day asked me, it's like, what's your measure of success? And I say with all seriousness, did they smile? Did they have a sense of wonder? Did they say, wait, what's going on here? This is kind of cool. It's that whoa, cool feeling that I want to bring into it, to open up the conversation, to begin to really do the kind of expansive innovation through imagination that we want to get. Here are other aspects. So looking at the conditions of the textile industry and the challenges that has related to pollution and climate change, we wondered what might it be like if things like bathroom mats were more organic, that you actually maybe grew rather than bought big pieces of cotton and other materials. And so this is what we do. The Near Future Laboratory is trying to find ways to help you unlock that beautiful potential of the human imagination to make sense of, create, and innovate in the world. And we do this in a variety of ways. So we've got both the kinds of artifacts from the future. I like to say we've got the world's only shop of artifacts from the future, things like TBD catalog. And then we have the practical material that I think is useful to folks like you, which is the instructions, essentially the how-to. So the Manual of Design Fiction explains this process of doing design fiction in a very straightforward way, very organized, almost like, now that I think about it, Bill Bowerman's jogging. Here are the steps, here's what you do, here are the ways in which you can communicate and represent the imagination and innovation within your organization. And then we also have tools like the work kit. The work kit of design fiction is a card set. It's meant to help you ideate and really give you interesting, creative, compelling prompts to begin to think outside of the box. Ironically, it's in a box. Think outside of the box and imagine into worlds that are not here yet, but that we would like to inhabit. Thank you. Want to do questions? I have a prize for anyone who asks a question. Okay, thank you.